Hello everyone, and thank you for coming. I'm on the mic because some people are watching on YouTube, and I think that helps. Yeah, so might look a bit silly because you're like, he's only a few meters away from all of us, but if we hold the mic when we ask questions, it'll allow some of the people watching at home to be a part of our space. So it's a good inclusive thing we can do. Thank you for coming along this evening. I have to say to Bob, this half of the table is, I thought maybe we'd get that, and you've given us a bounty, so it just looks wonderful. So thanks, Bob, for putting that energy and effort in and thought around that. Also, thank you for coming tonight to learn from the Wayside Chapel. They've been doing, I'm going to say as much as they've been in mission in King's Cross for 60 years. And I won't say more than that because John's going to tell you all about it. But I will gush about John. I actually started working with John about 15 years ago, and at one stage, John doesn't know this, but I did a mission exposure trip when he was the head of an organisation called Urban Neighbours of Hope, and the idea around that organisation is you live in a community and you get to know it and you just be bloody good neighbours and you join in with the spirit and you be love and you be healing. And so John did that in a couple of contexts, but he was the team leader at Bidwell where I met him, and I didn't even know it was on. So hopefully I just heard it come on and people can join in now. So hello if you are looking at home. I was just talking about John. He's trying to gush about him and just say, I've known, he's the head of the Wayside Chapel, but he's actually a guy that's lived out his faith tremendously well over decades, actually joining in with the nitty-gritty with people in poor communities, having them in his house, befriending them, doing very often invisible, not glorious friendship work. And so I really look up to John. I spent half a dozen years with John sort of being around in the context where I worked as a pastor in Bidwell, and I just saw amazing things happen out of Urban Neighbours of Hope. So I'm not going to say much more than that other than say this is a man of God and integrity and big heart. And John's going to start by just sharing about the Wayside and the story.
Yeah, thanks. I think Bobby set me up with that. Can they hear me at home? You don't know, do you? You'll never know. All right. Okay, hopefully, and it's not hitting too much. Hang on. I'm cold. And you guys are like, yeah, I ain't seen nothing yet, have you? So, thanks for that overly kind introduction, Josh. I knew Josh in his early 20s, and so I haven't actually seen him very much over the last 10 years, but he was a man full of energy and passion, and I thought surely a bit of that energy's dissipated over the last 15 years. And spending 4 hours with him today, I realised, no, it hasn't. He's still just as full of the fire and the passion to make a difference in people's lives, and in doing so, do it through the context of a congregation and a community. So I won't share for very long, and also have Kent here, Ken Crawford, who is the Director of Ministries at Wayside Chapel, and Kate Cootie, who heads up our community engagement team. And so we're here just to share a little bit, but then mostly to get questions. But we've spent the day looking at all of the different things that Orange Uniting Church is up to, and we got to sit in your lunch today and meet with some of your people who you've met not only in your community but also some of the service providers and some of the other churches that are you're in conversations with, and the way you're supporting people. And we've got to say, where do we sign up to be a part of Orange Baptist Uniting Church? It's yeah.
Saturday afternoon, 3 o'clock. Great.
Fantastic. Well, I've got to confess, I've got my godson just round the corner, so it is very tempting to come more often. I don't see him as much as I'd like. And so, look, Wayside Chapel is a parish mission of the Uniting Church. I'm sure you've all heard of it. Started by a young whippersnapper named Ted Knopfs, and then taken over by Ray Richmond, over to Graham Long, and then me more recently. We turned 60 this year, but really we're 20 years old now. 20 years ago, when the third superintendent turned up, the place was falling apart. It had done great ministry and mission in its community and was well known, it was well thought for, but hadn't really taken care of the place. And as you know, Fair Work was stepping in and shutting down buildings and saying, there's no way you're allowed to have people even walk into that chapel. It's going to fall down. And so the real turnaround came through back in the day. And Kent will speak more to that. But, many people think that we are here for, we're just there for people who are sleeping rough. But our mission is a bit bigger than that and a bit broader than that. And I'll just share a bit about that inspiration. Many of the people who come to the Wayside are sleeping rough. 40 to 60% of them are 30 to 40% of the community that come in of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander descent. And I think you could say nearly all of them have some sort of trauma in their life, and nearly all of them have some sort of struggle with their mental health as well. As Josh shared a little bit earlier in a bit overly flowery terms, is Lisa and I met when we were both members of a group called Urban Neighbours of Hope, and it was all about moving into the communities that we're trying to impact. And in the city, that's kind of probably a more important thing to state. I love coming out to the rural areas where people have grown up. You're still a new resident after 30 years in some of these towns, and so where everyone knows everyone and everyone's families, whereas in the city it can be very anonymous. So there was often a lot of great things that churches started, but they'd drive in and drive out, and this ministry was very different. It's about saying, die to yourself and plant yourself in this community. And send your kids to the local schools and reach out from the position, not necessarily as a minister, but as a neighbour. And so that was something that we were both very passionate about. I was running a home for men who were sleeping rough, many of whom had heroin addictions. It was the early 90s, so it was a mid-90s, so it was quite a hot spot in Springvale and Dandenong where we were in Melbourne. And Lisa was taking in women who were escaping family and domestic violence, and we were both serving on the same team. And we say it was love at first crisis, and we soon fell in love, and then we had we're planning our honeymoon, and I was planning a nice holiday on a beach, but Lisa was far more saying, no, this is about two people who are passionate about making the world a better place, are brought together by God and their faith. And so how do we begin our marriage in the way we want to continue it on? So our honeymoon was in Calcutta, which is not where I wanted it to be. And we served at Mother Teresa's Home for the Dying. And, it was a really formative month or so that we spent there. And we spent time in the Home for the Dying and in the mornings and in the orphanage in the afternoons. And it was a really beautiful time there. And so we would... you're assigned a person in this place, and it's important to know that in the middle of this very Hindu area of Calcutta, the Hindu temple has given the Mother Teresa's order a room in the basement of it to care for the dying and the destitute, which is a beautiful model of partnership, not only between churches but between faiths. And people are brought in there in their last moments of their life, and many are emaciated, many are starving, many have been street beggars who have had their limbs broken and to permanently be disfigured, and they're there. And your WH&S briefing lasts about one sentence, which is, they're already dying, please don't kill them, right? And so, and I'm not kidding, that's it. And you're told to do whatever you can, and I was assigned a young man who would have been my age but would have weighed 37 kilos, and it is a powerful experience to sit in a room where there are backpackers from all over the world, and they're spending time serving and caring for others. They could be anywhere in the world. They could probably be taking photos for Instagram, but they're there on their hands and knees, and that's bathing, reading to, toileting, feeding, cleaning, whatever's required. And so I got my guy and I said, I'm going to do better than these people, and I'm going to speak to my guy, and I pulled out the Lonely Planet Guide to speak Bengali, and you can hear my accent and you can see my face. There's a disconnect, right? But I was born in Malaysia, but I speak no Malaysian. I was raised in Melbourne, and I did speak Tamil, and then one day I came home and said, "Don't speak like that language to me, Mum." And Mum didn't, which is her fault, not mine. I was only 4, right? And so, completely forgotten it. I can follow a conversation, but if I speak it, they laugh. So I started speaking Bengali in this terrible ochre accent, and this little nun ran up to me and kicked me. And she would have been about 83 years old, and I said, "Aren't you supposed to be all about love?" And she said, "I am." She said, "Please stop speaking to him in Bengali. Your Bengali is terrible." Right? And she said, "Can't you see he is in enough pain already?" You know, she had really reached peak Zen Buddhist nun, right, I think. And she said, instead of speaking to him, just make sure every action and interaction you have with this person in the last moments of their dark existence on this world communicates to them that they're loved. Right? That says that there is a God who is so full of love that he will walk with you through that darkest valley as you go to the other side. And I thought there are much worse philosophies to live your life by, aren't there? How do we interact with everyone in a way that communicates that they're loved? And then in the afternoons we'd go to the orphanage, and it would kind of tear your heart out as you'd meet these most gorgeous kids, and they would tell you the stories about how they often have to find these kids and save them from some of the slave rings, and they do it every day. And I often say I sell more passion in those elderly nuns getting up every morning to try and find those kids that were being left at the train station than I do in most of the merchant bankers' eyes I meet in Sydney, you know, or the busyness of Sydney. We lead crazy lives in the CBD. We're so busy now that most people you ask, "How was your day?" and they can't tell you anything about their day because their days are so jam-packed with no gaps in it that their days are meaningless. You know, that's the crazy place we're in Sydney. However, most of them get to the end of the day and just collapse. The other thing when you're there is you meet Mother Teresa. She was dead by the time we got married, but you meet her. Some of the people who, some of those babies that were rescued and raised have become nuns in that place, and they'll share her teachings with you. And Mother Teresa used to come regularly to Australia and New York and England, and she would give the same message, which she would say that you need me far more than the lepers of Calcutta. And you think, no, I've been there. I think I'm calling bluff on that. But she would also say that loneliness is the leprosy of the West. You know, is there anything worse than feeling unloved or unwanted? This is that kind of society that does that to you. And lockdowns exacerbated in the CBDs, it was already underlying, is people are lonely. They're desperate for connection. They're desperate to have meaning in their lives. And that's where Wayside's mission is about creating community with no us and them. We invite everyone in our neighbourhood. We say, you don't need to, you don't need to have any sort of faith or belief to be able to serve others, to be able to feed someone who is sleeping rough, or to love. We say, just come and be yourself. As Tednoffs would say, that nearly got him kicked out of the Uniting Church a few times, is we're all members of the family of humanity. And how do we rediscover that common shared humanity? So we're a parish mission in the middle of that. We do have a congregation that worships. You know what? I don't meet too many atheists who are sleeping rough. We say that comfort is the greatest enemy of faith, not struggle. And many will speak of God's protection and the protection of angels while they're asleep at night under park benches. And it often kind of stops the words in the throat of many intellectual atheists that tend to be around Sydney in their droves. But anyway, I've gone too far. But so our invitation is out to people of faith and no faith, to the housed and the homeless, to the black and the white, the rich and the poor, is to say, come and be a member of the family of humanity, and come and serve each other and break down those barriers of judgment. and those walls. The world needs a better story. We're still stuck to the old stories, and if you think we've come far, I'll point you to Gaza and Ukraine and Somalia. We're killing each other because we don't know how to get along with each other. And so, we don't claim to be the answers to the problems of the church. We claim to be a response to the cries of the heart of people in our communities. So if there's anything worth begging, borrowing or stealing, it's yours. Just tell us what it is, and we'll. There's no secret formula. Anything we do, we've stolen anyway. And it's amazing. We don't try and fix people. We say our philosophy is no one is a problem to be solved. They're a person to be met. And we were speaking with a fascinating gentleman this morning who do they all know him? Gregory, not Greg. Gregory Smith, who when he was a young man on the streets of came to King's Cross. And his eyes lit up, and he said that was the place where I found. He said, I think his own words roughly were, he was, and very common for people who come in. They're driven by self-hate, they're driven by anger, and they're driven by a whole lot of things. And he said that was the one place I could go where it reminded me I was just a member of the human race. I wasn't a problem to be solved. And I studied social work, and I remember the second lecture ever. He said, when you meet a client, write down their name and then ask them all their problems, and then so that's a problem survey, a problem rank, a problem evaluation, and then you map out a plan with them that's sustainable, and you hand it to them like a prescription. And that's the problem with Western society, with our loneliness, is even our helping sciences are steeped in individualism, when the smallest human unit really is only two. I'll just finish. Me and Josh used to, took some kids out to Brewarrina once. And these were kids who were, often in and out of juvie, were the roughest of the rough, the toughest of the tough. And the funny thing about all that was after, we'd get them out to, we'd always stop. We didn't stop in Orange, we'd stop in Mudgee because there was a KFC. And then on the highway, and then... Yeah, you have to go off the highway. And we'd stop at Fernie's to get a big bag of flour in Dubbo and do a shop up. And then by the time we got out to Brewarrina, their phone reception was gone. You could see them freaking out and sweating. And it took about 36 hours for all the sugar and processed food to work its way out of their system. And then we go to a property called Compton Downs. And it is, it's got everyone has a role there. There's 15 dogs. There's no hot water, so you've got to chop firewood. Someone's got to light the fire. Someone's got to get the water from the well, the dam, and someone's got to... then we go hunting, and that's with knives and guns and everything you could imagine. And these are the roughest kids, No risk assessment would say give them a shot of a gun or get them a knife while you go pig hunting. But suddenly everyone had a role. And it was... not so much that these kids were the worst of the worst. It's just they didn't have a purpose. They didn't have a role. Every single place they interacted with told them they didn't fit. Sadly, it began at home, and sadly, and then and then at school, you're no good, you're naughty, you're useless, you're worthless. And I remember the naughtiest kid was was as we were driving through town, he asked us to stop the bus, and he said, I noticed that old lady doesn't have any wood in her firewood heap. Can we go cut some and take it back to her house? He could see that, and he said, and his job was to heat up the, what do they call it, the donkey, to every morning to have hot water. And as we were going home, this, his name's Nosy Gordon, who runs the property at Compton Downs, Raymond was crying in saying, please let me live here. Please let me live here. I don't want to go back, And because he had a role, he had a purpose, he had a community. He was someone, and he had something to contribute as well. And so that's what I see the church at its best being, is a community where we rediscover what it means to be a real community. I don't know what it's like in Orange, but Sydney, it's a really, like I spoke about, the gaps. There are no people... a page full of words with no spaces in it has no meaning. That's life in Sydney. You've got to stop and breathe and put margin into your life. But we also live in a culture that's completely inverse to a wisdom culture. It idolises being 21 forever, right? In fact, I think there's a store called 21 Forever there, and and everything then after 21 is about mourning your loss of your youth. You'll get an operation or an injection, or take this pill, or have this diet and squeeze back into this, and you just look at yourself as a marker of who you were rather than who you're becoming. Whereas in a wisdom culture, it values being a wise elder. That journey to the second half of life, and you can see, but there's a deep craving for it. I think it was the ABC series, the 4-year-old kindergarten, and you saw the impact that had on the young people, as well as the wisdom of the elders. And then I don't know if you saw the next season, for the teenagers. They were so broken, those teenagers, and the power of their relationship there was something that I think we play a key role in as the church in our communities. Yeah. So thank you for having us. Thank you for what you're doing. We are blown away. I'd say you'd be hard-pressed to find a church that's not doing something wonderful, but there is no church quite like yours that is doing so much in so many areas. Yeah, wonderful. Thanks. I think I've earned a bit of cheese. Right.
Thanks so much, John. Thank you for inspiring us, and we'll have a chance to ask John and Kent and Kate pick their brains about the Wayside and some of their learnings in a second. I'm just going to throw to Andrew to give a bit of a appreciative inquiry of you all and the journey you've been on in his time and some of the things that are taking shape that he sees as exciting.
Thanks, Josh, and thanks, John, for sharing. I was actually just thinking of a story which really, I suppose, echo some of what you're saying about relationship and about people having value. There was, Bev will know part of this story. There was, a few months ago, we were preparing for, can't even remember what it was, but it was some online session, and we were in that room up there, and Philippa, I think, brought a man into us. Might have been Philippa. I wasn't going to say his name or anything like. Preach Fest, yes. He'd come to the Bible study and said, "Can I see the minister or the pastor?" And so he came through, and he said, "Can I have a Bible, please?" And I said, "Oh, my heart warmed that this man was coming to us to borrow a Bible. Of course you can have a Bible." And so I gave him this Bible, and then he started shouting at us and swearing at us and ripped the Bible up in front of us, and he was just so angry with the church, and we just, we didn't react. I think we acted quite calmly and spoke to him. But the next time I saw him was at our church Christmas Day lunch. He came to that lunch that day, and I went in and saw him, and I went and said hello, and he said, "Look, I just want to apologize for the last time I met you." He said, and I said, "That's absolutely okay." He said, "I'm just, angry with the church." And I said, "The church has done a lot of things wrong over time. People are allowed to be angry, and that's okay." And then a couple of days ago, he called into the office and saw me and said, "Can I make an appointment to see you?" And I said, "Yeah, of course you can." And so he came back the next day, and he came in, and we sat for an hour in the office, and he said, "Look, I want to make up for what I did." And I said, "No, that's okay." I said, "You've apologized, I've accepted it." He said, "But no, I believe an apology needs action as well." And he said, "So I want to share something with you." And he spent this time talking to me about the dark triad of personalities, so Machiavellian, narcissist, and psychopath. He spent an hour talking about this. And his point was, he said, "I don't want your church to be damaged by anyone like this, so you need to know what they're like." And this was his passion and his interest. And he said, "I'm an atheist," he said, "but your church is a good church." And he said, "I do not want it to, so you need to know how to deal with narcissists, Machiavellians, and psychopaths." And I just thought, that's exactly it, that this person where his skill and his gift and his passion is something that I'd never thought of we might ever need in a church, and maybe I'll need it someday. But his response was, this is what I care about, and I want you to know this, because it's important. And so that was just my reflection yesterday, that how we respond to people, treat them as humans, treat them with value, and continue to love them even when they swear at you and rip a Bible up in front of you. And as Bev said afterwards, we always need to make sure we have an emergency exit nearby when some of these things happen. But that was your Save Church Act, because it was quite intimidating. But it's about, I think it's just about relationship and open doors. And this church does it well. Clearly, Wayside does it well, and I've seen that again and again. It doesn't take a minister to do that, but it's people who love. And so I want to acknowledge that. And I think that's why one of the reasons that we approached Wayside is last year we had a reflection on, is there a congregation or a church out there that we can link with, and maybe we can benefit from, but hopefully they can also benefit from what we do as well. And so we had to think about churches that had they had emphases which were similar to ours, and so ultimately we approached you, and I think we're going to have a good relationship as we continue with this. Our journey, I can only speak of our journey for the last 10 or so years since I've been here, and obviously the journey went for 100 and whatever years before that as well. But the last 10 years has seen a journey of a lot of sacrifices that these congregations have made, but doing it for a number of reasons. One of them being they saw that if they didn't, there might be closed doors, or might be some closed doors. And in fact, the treasurer, when I started here 10 years ago, whispered in my ear, we have enough money for 10 years. And after that, so unless we change things, Michael's the current treasurer. That was 10 years ago he said that to me. Was he right? He was pretty right, wasn't he? And so it was quite a motivation, I think, for us as well to say, okay, we need to do some things differently. So there's the financial motivation to make changes, but also I think the fact people saw that what we were as a church in Orange was a bit fractured and was not working at its best. And so I think those sacrifices that have been made have brought us to a place where we can actually now be quite brave and adventurous and say that even though we're spending all the money in our reserves and beyond, keeping to that financial theme, we're doing it because we believe the risk is worth it. And hopefully there will be some financial gain ultimately with some of our projects that we're doing, but far better to go out full of energy, full of motivation, full of passion, and knowing that we're not alone as we do it. We don't need to watch that video, do we? No? I was going to hand back to you. I was thinking, from our side as well, you don't just need to hear from me, so probably when we have questions as well, there's an opportunity for you to share things too.
Can I just ask another really totally off-beam question? Is it okay to get a cup of tea and coffee?
Yes, it's not a formal space. Just because we're standing here, I feel like if you want to go through and get a tea or coffee, that would be a very good thing to do.
I'm actually happy to make some. So how many people would like a coffee? Put your hand up.
Oh, thanks, Heidi.
And the rest of us are having tea? Yeah, tea.
We're a very service-minded church. That's what I really love about us. And I just want to say, I talk for like a tiny pinprick of what is the mountain of this church's history. We're about 20 months being here, and I'm jolly impressed because you have taking a risk and doing wonderful things, and we're being fruitful. It's very risky, but as Andrew said, we're doing it in the context of taking a risk that's feeding 150 people hot meals, or joining in with them on the street, or talking about setting up a literacy program with traumatised children, or literally accommodating women, and talking about how we can get other churches to do that too. And working really hard at being with young people and growing young, and you're just doing some great stuff. So with that in mind, we're doing a lot. We'd like to do it better and set up a board and try to sharpen our thinking about how we can grow and our structures. So part of the Wayside being here is they've done a lot of thought around that. They've been around the block a while, and they've certainly reinvigorated the life of the place in the last 20 years. So we want to respect them as a brains trust and a source of wisdom and knowledge and learning. And so I'm going to open up the floor for a bit of a Q&A. If you have any question you'd like to ask the Wayside about what they've learned or how they do it or what they see or anything at all, it's a time to pick their brains and hearts.
I just like to share something. 61 years ago, I was at a meeting in the Central Methodist Mission Fellowship House, and we were farewelling a young minister and his family, which were leaving the Central Methodist Mission to go over to this little rundown church at King's Cross. And he had no idea what he was going to do or where the people was going to come. But from that meeting, great things have grown. And I feel the same about tonight. Something's great is going to grow, but I don't know what, as we didn't 61 years ago.
What an amazing link that I didn't know about. Anne actually asked if we could hear a little bit from Kate and Kent. So if you guys, do you want to share a little bit about yourselves for a few minutes? I think that's would be great too.
You right if I go first, Kate? G'day everyone, my name's Kent. I recently started at Wayside in ministry, but my previous 10 years in ministry were spent as the Presbytery Minister of Sydney Presbytery. I was a Presbytery Minister when Anne started in her first placement at Strathfield Homebush. And as part of that role, I was asked to sit on the Wayside board. So from 2015 to 2022, I got to know Wayside in a governance sense by joining the board of Wayside representing the church. And I was added to the board initially because Graham Long's term would come to an end in the foreseeable future, 3 years away, that kind of thing. When Graham Long arrived at Wayside, as John said, roughly 20 years ago, Wayside was technically trading insolvent. It was run down, it was not well governed, it was not well managed, it was a shadow of itself. It had an incredible 40 years leading up to that, but it was a shadow of itself. Graham Long was a disgraced pastor of another denomination who'd been booted out for misconduct, which he's talked about publicly, so I'm not speaking out of school. Nobody really cared about Wayside. Well, the rest of the church didn't really care about Wayside 20 years ago. And Wayside had always been a bit of a strange experiment. Ted was charged twice with heresy. According to Bill Cruz at Ashfield, who came from Wayside originally, the second one probably killed him. He had a stroke after his second charge of heresy and never recovered, though he lived for a while but never recovered. And I only mention that to say Wayside was a rebel. It was weird. It broke rules. It made people uncomfortable. It did incredible work. He didn't know what he was doing, but he and Margaret started taking blankets to people who needed blankets. He didn't know what to do, but that was a bloody great start, right? And from there, Wayside grew, but until 20 years ago, like I said, it had fallen into disrepair. And one of the things that was a great blessing for me, and I'm a great enthusiast for Wayside and really glad to share the story and take no credit for any of what Wayside has done over the years. But for me, when I got to know Wayside, I felt like I had watched that a miracle had happened, and my job was to make sure other people knew that a miracle was happening. And that is that a church can go from essentially defunct to probably one of the best things we do in a 20-year span. When Graham Long first began, he started sending a weekly email to a group of about 6 or 8 people who were interested in what was happening, and he called it the Inner Circle. And he would send out a weekly email saying, well, here's the kinds of things that have happened at Wayside this week. By the time he left, there were 18,000 people on that distribution list. There were trading floors in Sydney's financial district that stop at 11 a.m. on a Thursday to read the Inner Circle. And he would read it out on ABC radio every week with James Valentine in his afternoon show back in the day. What started out for 6 or 8 people ended up with 18,000 trading floors stopping, and all of New South Wales listening to the ABC would hear that Inner Circle. Since John's arrived, I think we're up to now 45,000 people on that email list. Is that a ridiculous number to try to get your head around? Email lists, even for those of us who have been on the planet a while, are now very out of date. Email lists is no communication consultant's idea of a fresh idea, right? We've all subscribed to too many email lists, whether we chose to or not over the years, that how many emails do we just let go? We can't keep up with them. But 45,000 people, and the tracking tells us that the amount of people who stop to read that email is off the charts in terms of comparison to any other email list that it's going around. In fact, the consultants who come in tell us they don't use our data to compare to other people because it ruins their scores. It just throws off all the results. I think one of the things that Wayside has discovered that can help the church, and I come again as a person not who takes any credit for this, but as someone who wants to help share the story, is that Wayside has found a way of being and a way of talking about our faith without using any religious language that resonates such that 45,000 people are reading an email every week at a rate unheard of in the sector. That people are listening on radio, that people want to be a part of it. And both Graham's initiation and John's deep capacity to speak on ABC TV. You've seen this guy on ABC TV? You've been watching? See him showing up on the drum and compass and Q&A in a couple of weeks? Pray for John on Monday the 29th as he's on Q&A. People, I think, are willing to listen to what the church has to say if they can first see what we offer and what we do in the community. And the church is probably rightly a bit marginalised in the community. The church, as a total concept. It's sad for us who've been a part of it for our whole lives to see the marginalisation of the church. But we probably deserve to be on the outer a bit because of so many things that have been done by the church in so many places. Yet I believe that our legitimacy to speak is restored when people see how we act, how we treat, how we serve, how we include, how we be a blessing in our community. And then people are willing to listen to what we have to say. The blessing, one of the blessings of Wayside to the whole church, and if there's any way we can be of assistance to you, is to help you to encourage to find ways to talk about your faith, to talk about your hope, to talk about that which is at the core of your being in ways that lower the bars of resistance, because it's not encoded in the language we've all decided is Christian language. This doesn't mean that we forego our commitment to Christ. This is a commitment I've made in my own life and will maintain until the day I die. It does mean, though, that I have to challenge myself to not just use the language of the insider, the language that I know that the church resonates with, but instead to keep finding language to talk about that which is important to us in ways that people can say yes to. My famous and last story for now is a moment in response to the inner circle that, as I mentioned, the email list that goes out. Once there was a response to a particular inner circle where the president of the Uniting Church, who was at the stage Professor Andrew Dutney, wrote back to say, "Amen and amen and amen, brother." And Dick Smith, avowed atheist, wrote back, "You are 100% right." When you can have the president of the church and avowed atheist saying yes, one in religious language, amen and amen and amen, and one in non-religious language saying you are 100% right, I think we've found the capacity to speak following our actions in ways that people respond to and want to be a part of. And if there's any way that we can help with some of that work, as you find your way to act in Orange and then speak to those who are willing to listen, following, seeing how you act, we'd be glad to be of service to you in any way we can. That's enough from me for now. Kate, do you have anything you want to say?
I can never resist that, Kent. Hello, everybody. So, yes, I'm Kate, and my gig is community engagement. So, bridge building, the stuff that you're all interested in, making connections, that's absolutely what I live and breathe. And it was such a pleasure to be at lunch today in the Mustard Seed Cafe, because I'm a country girl, New Zealand for a while, but country Victoria as well. And I know that when you're bringing people along on the journey, making sure that food, fun, storytelling and space for being who you are is what makes me leap out of the bed every day to do what I do. But it's how you meet all the best people in the world, isn't it? And also how you bring those best people along to help people that are struggling and help you discover stuff about yourself as you all get together along the way. So I get to throw a lot of parties in my job. Not a bad job at all. But I'm really interested in connecting with this community to see how you do things and how we can share ideas, and then the practical logistics of how you get 150 meals on the table on a Saturday night, and the very down-to-earth side of what you're trying to do. But thank you so much for having us all. It's a real pleasure to hear your exciting ideas and see some very practical delivery underneath it as well. Thank you.
So we are completely blessed. All I hear from that is we are great people in living out our faith. We're doing really well, and we've got really great people here together. So this is a bit of a dream time. Any questions, anything you'd like to ask any one of these three?
I'm going to ask a religious question. How do you, as a team of people, I have a reason for asking it, but I'm genuinely interested to know, how do you, in your day-to-day work as a team of people, celebrate your devotional life? How do you pray? How do you worship together? How do you encourage each other as you go out into your daily work? What rhythms do you use? How do you do it?
John or Kent, I'm guessing either one of you could tackle that. I'm going to give it to you, John.
We could both give different answers. So the pumping heart of Wayside is our congregation. And so, we often say, our I think 70 to 80% of our staff and volunteers would be no religion or no faith, and then 5% would be Christian, and then probably another 10% undercover Christian. The pumping heart is our congregation. So our programs, I say, are our hands and feet, and our volunteers are the lifeblood, but it's the congregation that is the pumping heart of all that we do. So on Sunday, and this is particularly at King's Cross, is our community service centre is in the same room as our chapel, and so just for an hour or two on a Sunday morning, we don't open the cafe space, and we gather together for worship, and we have this open sharing. There's often heckling that goes on. I mean, last week I said, "Can everyone hear me?" And someone said, "I can, but I'm willing to swap with someone who can't." You know, and you know that kind of heckling goes on all the time. But it's life at its rawest, and that is often a way that it helps us sustain our faith in that space. You know, our times of worship together are unique, to say the least. But it is kind of the heart of what we do. You know, I often say that the congregational worship moment on a Sunday is, and I grew up going to a church, and I say it's the icing on the cake. The cake is our shared life during the week of being involved in people's lives in the community, about making a difference together, and the icing's on the cake. Except I grew up in a church where it was just the cake on a Sunday, the icing, and it gives you diabetes pretty quickly, and you know, it doesn't really satisfy. Whereas to see the way someone who is volunteering during the week is a part of the congregation, and participation in our mission is how we define membership. It is so we have maybe 30 to 70 worshipping on a Sunday with us, but you know, it's the hundreds during the week that I see living out God's. You know, we say that, you know, Jesus never asked to be worshipped, he only asked to be followed. And so I see a lot of following, but that kind of enlivens a worship moment as well. And then personal disciplines are really important, as well as communal ones too. Ken?
So we have about 140 staff. I just thought I'd let that sit for a minute.
Graham Long said, once you get your first cheque for $250,000, the rest are easy, right, from a donor, right? So
Yeah.
Treasurer nods, right?
And we're now spread across both King's Cross and Bondi. So there was a parish mission in Bondi Beach, that the presbytery stepped in to manage for a while, and then eventually asked Wayside to take it over. So we have two sites, and those staff are split across those sites. One of the things I think we try to do, as a way of answering your question, we're clear that our vision as a church is love over hate. And we're clear that our mission is to create community with no us and them. My understanding of what it is that we do, or what it is worship does for us when we participate in worship, is it reorients us towards our true calling and towards our true purpose. That's what the gift of worship to those who worship in community together is, to be reoriented towards that which is foundational and that which is core. So what we try to do amongst our staff of all faiths and none is to regularly reorient around our purpose, is to regularly call to each other to attend to our purpose, is to tell stories to each other and among each other of love over hate, of creating community with no us and them. We, of course, have the disciplines when we gather together of acknowledging the land on which we meet, but we've also had traditions of talking about moments that matter and moments of mission as a way of inviting people to pay attention to their own. Like John said, we're all so busy we don't have enough time to make meaning. We try to make time to make meaning together of what it is that we're about, what we're seeing, what we're understanding, and what perhaps is being revealed to us about life and about ministry and about whatever language we would put around that. So different teams have different practices. So each team would have its own way of refocusing around purpose. One of my absolute privileges is to lead the ministry team. So we gather and we read the Bible and we pray and we reorient around understanding the mission of the church as best as we can and how Wayside's called to live that out. But I think that happens in whether religious form or not. It's still a reorienting towards core purpose is my best way to answer your question.
Can I just ask how you went about getting that first cheque for $250,000?
So part of the miracle of Wayside is Wayside as it exists today, this new buildings that were open 10 years ago, John, is it roughly 10 years ago? That building project cost $8 million, and those funds were raised during the global financial crisis. So that's 15 years ago that the funds were raised. The idea that $8 million was raised during the global financial crisis by going to the top end of town and putting the hard word on the very well-heeled. And Graham's point about once you've got the first $250,000 cheque in your hand is once you've got that, you ask to see their address book and you take them with you to go visit all their influential friends who don't want to be seen to be giving less. Just takes one, and then take them with you to visit their friends. That was his method. At one level, I thought, no one's ever going to say that to me again. Like sounds so outside my experience. But in part, if you believe what you're doing, not out of fantasy, but out of this is important work, there are people who want to join you in that important work. And the church becoming less embarrassed to ask for money, and I don't mean just in a public appeal, I mean sitting there. John has been going through crash courses of late in order to sit in those living rooms and have those conversations. You're going to have to ask him, because I have no idea still personally what it would be like to sit in there. I've never asked for $250,000, but it can be done, apparently. Got any thoughts on that?
Oh, look, we're not swimming in money at the moment, but I have no problems asking for money if I am rock solid convinced that the mission that we are on is the one that God wants us to be on about. So taking that passion into the conversation is, for me, that's the only thing I need. I always say, if we're on mission, I'll go out and ask for the money, and God will provide. Of that, I'm convinced. Yeah.
Can I ask who or what decides the mission, and how is it described, and how is it regulated or measured or changed or altered or whatever?
Sorry.
Say it I'm just wondering if I can have some sort of clarity around the buzzword mission and vision, and who decides, how is it decided, how is it regulated, how is it changed, how is it modified, how does it respond?
You have a go at that, Ken. I want to hear you say it.
I think that Wayside's revival really rests upon the clarity of answers to those questions. So I think those are really important questions. The Wayside board are the owners and keepers of the vision and the mission as the governing body of the organisation, which includes the CEO and senior pastor. So it's not separate from John in his role, or Graham prior to him. But the governing body ought to take responsibility for those key purpose statements, not just as a thing for a poster, but as an organising principle. It's meant that over the years, Wayside has been able to use those statements to decide what to do and what not to do. And what not to do is probably more important than what to do. There's been all kinds of opportunities over the years and all kinds of experiences of getting off purpose, off mission, of slightly missing the point or the target, and having to return and having to reclaim. And so Wayside has named its mission to create community with no us and them, and named its vision as love over hate. Graham Long used to say the only time that the board ever had to have the chair use his casting vote in the entire time he was there was on the love over hate decision for the vision of Wayside, because half the board were of the view that you can't have the word hate in a public statement. It's not appropriate. And the other half of the board were convinced, as Graham was, that hate was real, that it was being experienced and must be stood against by something even more powerful and more beautiful, and that it ought to be enshrined. So the chair required to cast a casting vote for that. But it's a way of answering your question. The governing body has to focus less on the operations and more on those big picture purpose statements in order for the organisation to be able to flourish. How does it change? Well, it hasn't in the last 20 years in terms of those statements. In terms of how it gets operationalised, how it gets worked out in staffing and programs, ought always be a contextual and timely. So it's not that those programs are set once and forever. You know, COVID is a great example of, well, all your plans are out the window. We are where we are. Now what do we do? But having those clear statements enables you to then go, well, whatever it is we now do has to achieve that. Not just, people can't come here to Wayside anymore, so let's do X instead or Y instead. Oh, that sounds good. That's a good use of time. No, the right question is, does it help us create community? And that's why I say those statements help you choose what not to do. And that's probably even more important. Yeah. Did we cover the breadth of your questions?
That's perfect. But, you know, many people would have heard Graham share everything you've heard tonight, and they would say, how do I get that? How do I get that check? Or how do I get 50,000 people to get my parish pump? And he would always say, get the vision right, get the mission right. Those two things have to be absolutely in line, and the other things will fall into place after that. But then stick to that. Don't deviate from that. The board has to often stand against the ministry team to say that's not part of the mission, because when you got your head down in it, you often forget, and you know that a need doesn't constitute a call. And I think it's important for us to play well in the sandpit, you know, of community services, but to know at your core what your call as a community is. You know, what can you do that only you can do? You know, and hold fast to that. Yeah, that's all the wisdom we got there. And that's right. You reminded me. Ted Knopfs was a supply minister in Wilcannia. Was that right? He was. Yeah, I've heard stories. He would, he would go around doing the hatch matching and dispatching across the Central West in the 60s, all the christenings and the weddings and the funerals, yeah, before coming.
Thank you. Some wonderfully inspiring stories here this evening. I'm just wondering, what's the content of your newsletter, please? I think we might have to be 45,001 tonight. What is the content of your newsletter, please? And the reason I ask that is that in my job, now I work for the Mission Growth and Innovation team for Uniting Mission and Education. I'm a rural regional consultant, and I am aware of so many congregations that have a pantry or a food bank or something like this that they may operate once a week or twice a week. And I'm just wondering, I'm looking for ways of supporting them. So I was wondering if your newsletter might be just one way that I can suggest, if they don't do that already, whether you actually offer insight into what you do into that newsletter.
There's a brilliant philosopher named Alistair McDermott, and I don't understand any of his writings, but he has one quote that says, I cannot begin to answer the question, what am I to do, if I first can't answer the question of what story do I find myself a part. And so it's about telling stories. You know, we are meaning-seeking animals. And so the people say that, well, Graham had a real gift with writing and philosophy. I'm not such a great writer, but I just write about what I see happening in our community and then work out a way to share that with an audience that I know doesn't come from a faith background. And I share the highs and the lows and everything in between that I know every church is involved with, every minister, every community is involved with, but I just help find a way of kind of telling that story really you know, I often think, oh, when are they going to work out I only really got 5 topics? It just really, what was I going to say? It helps connect people in. Often people say thank you. It's the one thing that's real in my life. But, you know, back to that quote, I think it also, a big part of it is, and it recently won a national award for best fundraising tool, even though we only ask for money in it about 3 or 4 times a year. Because a lot of the donors, as soon as you give a donation to us, we'll automatically subscribe you. And we have a very low unsubscribe rate. And people say thank you, because this is the only thing I get from the charity I support that's not hitting me up for more money. It's kind of a thank you. It's a love letter to our donors and our community. And so that back to that quote, I think it's also, people say, I know where I'll give my money if I know what story I'm a part of. And I always call them, thank you, my inner circle, or thank you for being a part of our inner circle. And people just love it. I know the Royal Flying Doctors are have got a podcast that's up to season 5 or 6, because they've got thousands of stories, and they just tell their stories about what they're doing. I think Royal Far West are going to start something very similar too. It's just about telling that story and connecting in. I think we moved out of a season of a few decades ago of you need to broadcast everything, and now we're more into narrowcasting, which basically means throw out your content in whatever way you can, and it'll catch the people who it's meant to, because the algorithms all tend to send you what you like on your phone. So and encourage members of the community who gets the newsletter to share it with others, and you'll find your people who will resonate with it. And we have so many people, including our most wealthy donors, who have some sort of resonance point. They've got a family member with a mental health struggle or an addiction, and they might be giving for years, and then they'll say, "Well, you don't know this, but my sister used to come to Wayside, when she was younger, and I just thank God for the work that you do." So, it's that donor engagement tool. One of our biggest donors just heard Graham Long reading it out on the radio, and he still is a regular donor there. It's the most real charity, because we're not trying to fix anything or end anything. We're just trying to love in this world.
I would just add, John's far too humble about his capacity to write. He has a beautiful capacity to write. The inner circle is, I used this phrase the other day about John amongst the senior staff, and it feels weird to say this out loud because it's a strange phrase, but those of you over a certain age will appreciate this. John has a very winsome way of communicating. And that's in person, pastorally, in worship, and in writing. And I think the inner circle is a winsome piece of weekly literature that catches hearts and minds, captures attention, captures people's willingness to live into a better story. So it might be only 5 topics, I've never noticed, but each week I feel more drawn into being a better version of myself and participating in a better version of the church for a better version of the world, whether or not any of that is actively discussed or not. It's a deliberate invitation to be better, and not at a you must do better. There's none of that. There's a helping us see more beautifully, helping us notice, help us pay attention. And there's great wisdom that has to be distilled to not bash people over the head or to not correct people, but to lay it before us such that we can all nod and go, yep.
Yeah.
It's
yeah. Good. Oh, thanks, Kent. I'm blushing now. Can't tell. It's that you get it, don't you? So it just helps connect because people often who are on the inner circle when they're on holidays will come. So I just want to check it out for real, and it's fantastic. So
I really find it very encouraging, and I look forward to it every week coming, and it's certainly worth joining in with. And I just, with the hot meals, I find that, and the people that you meet there, and it just gives you encouragement. And I really appreciate it. I said to John before, once I realised that who he was, that how much that we appreciated it.
And I think when it comes to religion and the gospel, I think Graham would say, use this terrible phrase, but it kind of resonates, is, the culture's thrown the baby out with the bathwater and they realised there was a baby in there somewhere. I think last week I said, you'll never be able to restore your soul unless you can lie down in green pastures. And I got a few emails going, that's a great phrase, where'd you get it from?
Can I just say, Jenny, I think on Sunday when you got up and just shared those two stories, that one lady now had a house to live in and that one guy had a job, it was just very factual what you said, but to me it encompassed the whole ethos of what we're doing in Hot Meals, because it says we are feeding people, yes, but we are caring about people and we notice people and we hear their stories. And so you sharing that I don't know how other people experienced it, but for me, it just reignited my sense of this is why we are doing this, is so that people know there's someone batting for them, even if the batting for them is giving them a meal, but there was something to celebrate in their journey. So, I think that's the core of it, isn't it? Two very simple stories, but wow, what an amazing depth behind that. So, yeah. So thank you for sharing those.
I'd also like to say that announcements is always a time for more stories, particularly if you can say them in 30 seconds to a minute. Like, Andrew's not going to stop you. He's probably going to just say thank you for sharing the work we're doing. So encouragement to all of us to live good stories. John writes well because he's spent time living those stories with those people, and that's something hopefully we all do and can do more, and let's share them. Any other questions for Kate or Kent?
So my question's actually about staffing. So the current plan with the housing is that, with the boarding house, is that we have a volunteer. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but that we'll have a volunteer working as the staff member who sees people coming in, and as was mentioned, there will potentially be a lot of people with mental health issues, drug and alcohol issues, intergenerational trauma, all that sort of stuff. And I guess I'm interested to know how we can have someone ready to support those people when they're a volunteer, or whether it's worth employing someone who has, I guess, a background in that.
That was the hardest question of the night. As Kent mentioned earlier, we have a centre down at Bondi Beach and also one up at King's Cross. At Bondi, and we've got paid staff in both, but the one at King's Cross has very few to some weeks no incidents. There are the biggest issues there are alcohol and is alcohol use. Whereas up in the Cross, there's a lot of ice and meth and all sorts of stuff going on, and So getting that right is a difficult one, and doing trauma-informed care. I was a church minister, like a missionary for years and years and years, and didn't realise becoming superintendent meant I spent so much time looking at risk registers and new psychological health and safety guidelines that have been in force across New South Wales. So doing that well, doing that properly is, it's not an easy question to answer. And so you need trained, skilled volunteers as well as unskilled volunteers, but we do have some paid staff. We don't, we never have and hopefully never will have security guards in the place, because we very much, we don't call anyone who comes in a client, we call them visitors. That's really important for us. But that makes us hosts as well. So thinking about it like as in, I often will say to the frontline teams, you're not just going to let someone in who's then going to start throwing your stuff around your house. You'll say, we have to, within a trauma-informed care, and there's always training around de-escalation, and we do have duress alarms, and we have certain scenarios where the team leader can call the police to attend as well. So we have all of those safety protocols and training in place. But we'll say, we have exclusions as well. We want to keep the edges hot to keep the centre soft, which means there is behaviour that's unacceptable, and we'll say just cool off, go for a walk around the block, come back tomorrow. We need to, and that has to be a constant conversation. Our volunteers, we have a very specific defined role for them. So they're at the front desk, they're behind a desk often, or they're in the cafe, and then they'll come out to serve the meals and serve the tea. Whereas it'll be our frontline workers that will really do the first point of contact and interaction as well. So we like to let our volunteers, we say, you get the best job in the world, you just have to give out socks and undies and remember how many cups of tea that person likes and how many sugars they like in it, and or pick out the clothes that people are asking for. So there are very defined roles there for our volleys and very defined roles for our staff. But the training, I think the training's the most important, and the debriefing again were all really important, because it's always going to. And I always, say for volunteers and staff, everyone who ends up volunteering or working for us has some form of experience. Very rarely does someone turn up who wants to work or volunteer with us who everything's gone right for in life. And so everyone's got some sort of shared experience. I say my best workers are doing the work. And so then my most dangerous workers are looking for healing through their work, right? And what they end up doing, unfortunately, is replicating and projecting those cycles. Simple example, I grew up being so neglected, so my call in life is just to love everyone. And they don't do the work, so they don't have boundaries, so they end up doing everything, responding to midnight calls, doing this, doing that. And guess what? After a while, they explode and replicate that cycle of abandonment with the people who they've actually created a scenario where they've come to depend on them. Silly little example, but so common, right? But there are other traumas there that how do we continue to keep that as a live conversation and give people the right tools? Like I think I have to pay my therapist's therapy bill, because sometimes he says, "What happened this week?" and I'll explain. He said, "What?" It's important to keep doing that work. It's not easy work, but you want to be generative in what you do with people, and not looking to fill some gap through doing it, if that makes sense.
I had an example that still, I keep trotting it out, I know, but Charles Ringmer, who founded Teen Challenge years ago and was involved in that, unpacked the parable of the paralysed man who was brought to Jesus by his 4 friends and let down through the roof. And Charles' take on it was they were working with heroin addicts and they were all getting burnt out because, they'd have a heroin addict would come into a family and, it would all get burnt out. And he said then he worked it out. He said it took 4 healthy people to bring one sick, in this case, person to Jesus. And that revolutionised the way they did their therapeutic work with Teen Challenge, because he said, we realised in the Christian world these days, we tend to have our hospitals and our aged care centres and our, whether it's our drop-in centres or our refuges or whatever, and we put in as many, in inverted commas, sick people as we can to maximise the dollar and use as few staff as possible. And so we keep perpetuating that cycle because we all get burnt out. And then go on again. But in fact, if we reverse it, if we look at that and we say it took 4 healthy people to bring one sick person to Jesus, well then that's where we need to do our equation differently. So we need a healthy community around whatever we do over here. To have a volunteer or a paid worker to manage it won't work. It will only work if we have a healthy community. That's right. Engaging and support. Sorry if I'm preaching to the converted.
No, I love that.
And it's something
he was saying that in
passionate
the
about.
90s.
Yeah.
Right? And
well, this was in the 80s.
In the 80s, right.
And he probably started in the, got to go back to the Jesus Revolution, 70s, flower power and all that.
And that professionalisation and individualisation of care and aged care and any care has gotten even worse, right? In that time.
Schools, everything. We try and put in maximum clients, maximum sick people, whatever, for the fewest.
The government tried to mandate 8 minutes a day, face-to-face time for every resident in aged care per day. Yeah. And there was a lobby group of CEOs of aged care facilities that petitioned the government to say that's an impossible legislative requirement to meet. Yeah, absolutely. 8 minutes a day per patient, face-to-face.
Yeah.
Crazy.
My first response to your question was going to be that I thought that one paid or one volunteer was like nowhere near enough, but I held back because I don't know enough about your situation. I don't want that to come across as some kind of I have judged the situation. It's not enough. But your input has helped me find my way to talk a bit about that. In my experience as a Presbyterian minister with a different congregation, this was a congregation that had 2 sites. Its worship and its fellowship activity on one site, and a spare site from which it ran an op shop. That op shop only ran once a week, but it was a big and active op shop. And the minister was sent down from the congregation to minister amongst the op shop stuff during the week. And I remember when we were doing a consultation with the congregation, we said, what's your mission? Back to the hot button word. What's your mission? Oh, the op shop. And what do you mean by that? Well, it's engaging the people at the op shop. And so we said to them, great, bring that op shop up into your church. Rather than doing it at that other church down the road, bring it up here amongst. Oh, we don't want all those people in our church building. And we can rightly laugh at that and feel a sense of horror about that. If we're not driven by that sense of which our mission is to be there in some way or another, and it's not that everybody has to become an expert in trauma-informed care and to take a shift on the desk. Unless we're all there, it's not really our mission. And if we're going to outsource it, whether to a volunteer or a staff member, and say, we're glad it's being done in our name, but it's at an arm's length, it's not mission. And so my answer is not X number of staff or X number of volunteers. It's whatever you do, please don't put it at arm's length. Let it be the kind of thing that breaks your hearts open wider and invites more people in the community whose hearts are broken wider open to come and be a part of that, and figure out the staffing and the volunteer ratios and all those kinds of things. Like your question's a great question because it provokes that fundamental, are you going to run that and expect reports from it and generally keep it at an arm's length? Or is it going to become the thing that, one of the ways in which you express that broken open heart that you have for your community, in which case you probably hopefully have more volunteers than you can handle. I realise that's a bit pie in the sky, but it's aiming for that kind of response is what I'm trying to say.
And just get started. Ask for forgiveness rather than permission. But yeah, unfortunately you have to catch up at the other end. But I was thinking my greatest moments of discipleship would never have happened if we had to do a risk assessment first, right? And did the WH&S kind of oversight briefing. We would have never gone camping, not even got. That's right, But you got to find how to do both, and stay in the tension. So pray for your leaders and support them, because a solution was offered a few decades ago to every denomination, and they said, instead of being Baptist churches, we'll just take all the care away from you and become Baptist Care and Uniting Care and Anglicare. And minister said, yeah, I was trained in preaching, so you do all the risk. And now churches are dead, and these care arms are flourishing, right? And every subsequent minister is just, I said, they cancel 4 years of Bible college, teach them how to do funerals, right? That's all you need to do. Unless you want to stay in the tension, right, of keeping the ministry and the mission in tension together. Because if you let go of that, you just... I'll give you a Dorothy McRae McMahon book on how to do a funeral. You don't even have to mention God. One photograph, photocopied A4 paper, right? But if we want to stay in vital ministry, we'll be in that tension of how to balance it all up. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant. Right.
But it's true. Reckon everybody, if there's a funeral here of somebody who doesn't belong to the church, right, normally, we need to make sure there's half a dozen people here who will just be here and go to the wake and pass around cups of tea, because that's what we do really well. Evidence tonight, but no, isn't it? Isn't that what we do really well? And the first funeral I ever took over at St John's, I went up to Duntry League for the wake, and seriously, the family were all sitting around the edges like stunned mullets, and I was the only person from the church who went back to... There were other people from the church who sort of came to the funeral because the family had some remote connection to the church. But I really wished some of my other friends from the congregation had come back to Duntry League with us, because all they would have had to do was give cups of tea, and it would have just, and do it, caringly and kindly and with a listening heart, and it would have just made such a difference. So I agree. Funerals are a huge... Anyway, sorry.
Actually, I say nothing brings our mission to life like a funeral. If you ever want to see it, it's because there'll be someone there who the hospital will be there saying what a great patient he was, and the social worker team will be going, he was a great client. And our guys don't say a word. They're just weeping because they're like, they've lost a sister or a brother. And I say, that's what we're here for. Right, that's... Yeah. I've done more than one dog funeral as well. Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask Kate or Dorothy Dixer? Kate, can you use a community garden to build community with no us and them? It's a Dorothy Dixer, I made it clear. How can you use a garden to create community?
Thank you. It's getting
create community.
Do you have a community garden that's connected to Orange Uniting? Yet. Ours is on the roof, actually, which might be challenging here, but great. So I'm not sure if you're just deliberately throwing me into this. I am not a gardener. Yet I run Gardening with Kate a lot. And we do have a wonderful community gardener who's trained in horticultural therapy. And what he's reminded me, because I do come from a family of obsessive gardeners, is it's safe to fail. And actually, if you're out there saying, I'm not a specialist in this, but I know that hanging out with people and taking a bit of a safe risk and starting to have a chat in nature or over a cup of tea is incredibly powerful. And frankly, green cells. It's great fun. You've been out there camping out in the grass out the front. A lot of people, what better billboard? Not the sign, but the grass and the tree, and people out there being human, So yes, the opportunity to use and celebrate all of the different skills in your community, and that's what brought me to Wayside, is everybody comes with his gift and you don't know what it is yet. Just like Parks now has an Elvis festival, anybody brings their passion, and if the passion is that they're great at making sure everybody at Awake has a cup of tea and is feeling a bit comfortable, that's such a gift. And what I love about community building is you get the chance to elevate that stuff. So people go home from gardening with Kate and they boast to their partners, these are corporates that we're bringing in, I'm a gardener now. And my mother's horrified every time I ring her and tell her. But that's okay, because actually saying, I might not be good at this at all. I do always check if I've got many green thumbs in the crowd first. But the chats that happen, and the, hey, I'm not perfect at this either, and the opportunity to be in a different space and be a different kind of person from what you might be in your day-to-day is really cool. Thanks for that question.
Well, I've got to follow up, only because I work closely with Kate and I know all kinds of fun stuff that you guys are going to enjoy hearing about. You just said corporates come to Wayside.
Yeah. I feel like
do most churches have corporates come and visit, or come and volunteer, or come and do so? Why do corporates come, and what do they do when they come? What do you mean by corporates? Well, my guess is most churches have no concept of what on earth that means and looks like. So
fantastic.
rather than presume, tell this group what you are amidst when you're talking about corporates in the garden and other opportunities.
Yes, I shouldn't presume that you know what I'm on about here. But there's clearly entrepreneurship thriving in this community. And I guess for me, my favourite part of my job is spinning plates. I can see you're doing that at a whole lot of levels, but there's an opportunity to invite people in when you've been talking about the inner circle, because I'm not religious. I grew up that way in small town New Zealand church, and church meant you could find a plumber or get to go to a great potluck supper for me as a kid. And that's what I grew up on. And that community, I live and breathe that. That's my church. So to go back and have an opportunity with a place like Wayside, with a community like what you're building, and say, everybody could find something here. We just have to show you and work out what language is going to work for you. So, and at a very practical level, we need funding. So we have a corporate education program. We run these fabulous days called a Wayside Days on a Thursday. It's an opportunity for a company. I'm sure you've heard about social responsibility and corporate volunteering. A company might just want to do that for their people. They're going to invest in their team. They want to do something, they have a really great intention, or they might be ticking boxes, but we're very lucky we don't tend to get the groups that are ticking boxes. But a lot of corporates, especially after COVID, are not coming just because they're given 2 volunteering days a year and they want to do something, and we do charge them good money for it. They're often coming through because finding purpose, getting to live life through somebody else's shoes for a little while and get an experience of that is really valuable. It's valuable to those companies for their bottom line. It makes for happier people in their team. And this whole thing, social capital, that's a real buzzword right now. It's a real thing, and people are finally getting it. I mean, we all know that you've been trading in social capital all along. But it's really powerful. And listening to that story of a group, whether they're the team from Bunnings, or I learn a lot about trading floors, and they teach me about young trading graduate programs we're in a couple of weeks ago. And we spent time gardening with Kate on the roof at Wayside, and these incredibly bright young people taught me about how they see the world and what they know about algorithms and what's affecting them right now. And I squirrel that away and I cheat, and I use that on the next session. but it's such a wonderful exchange. So I highly recommend the opportunity. We meet with schools. We have incredible, it was wonderful to meet with one of the staff from Kinross today and understand how your story plays out at every level of the community, and you get to have great creative fun working out how you're going to do that. Does that answer your question? You know, I could talk about this a lot.
Well, I mean, we loved being at the lunch today. How many local real estate agents would love for their staff to come and serve lunch once a year as a expression of engagement with the community? Like at one level, we keep always imagining we have to keep finding the people. We have to keep generating the service, when actually we can invite others to come and play, to come and be a part of. We just have to be clear what we're inviting them into. And it to be something that is safe for people who are not part of a church to come and be a part of a church. And so there's no criticism of the volunteers who serve today. That's not my intention of raising that. It's beautiful, it's wonderful. But maybe there's some others who we presume it's just us doing all the hard work. Actually, I think that there's people who would want to be a part of it if you can make a mechanism for them to do it, and you can charge them for the privilege.
Yeah. And because of our mission-led way we go about that lunch is after they cook it and serve it, they actually sit down and share it together as well. And that's one example of how, whilst it looks like any meal that any food pantry does, our mission makes it different as well. Yeah. And I always think, do you think Jesus would turn up to a food and wine festival? Yeah, I reckon he would. I reckon you should register a booth, right next to one of the options for the three-hatted restaurant can be rissoles and gravy, down in the community centre. Tell a story. Sorry, Kate. Okay.
Yeah, no, I think the other thing I would add is this is not performative in any way. It's not corporate daycare. I'm always really clear. We're not running an experience events company. As you say, it connects back to mission. If you want to hang out and share some stories and connect across the community. And there are some perhaps well-intentioned but misguided requests. I remember my second week at Wayside, I got a call from a very well-known private school, and the director of mission there said, I've got it all sorted out. I'm going to bring our senior boys, that we're going to bring a bus, they're going to make lunches, and they're going to go and deliver them to people sleeping in the park. And I really struggled with finding the right language in my second week in the job, but I was horrified. And so I said, if you're having the worst day of your life, can you imagine a bus pulls up and two nice boys in private school uniforms trundle off the bus and come across to you in your lunch bag? How that might make you feel. And we had an interesting chat. So I went out to her office because I wanted to see us in person, and it was really special because who am I to tell her in any way, but we just got together on that kind of human element. And since then, it's really informed, and her opinions back have really informed on how we've been developing the schools program to turn it into something that is not in any way performative. It's actually how can we really participate in raising those whole children and contributing something of that evidence. So I've gone off topic there, but I was just thinking about that. It really feeds into that. Then design is listening to your community, thinking about how stuff will feel, and it develops from there.
Yeah, you charge them for it? Sorry, you charge them for it? Can I have an explanation, a rationale, or please?
How much do they pay?
Yeah, well, one, why you charge them for it, I suppose.
So if you want to do something really special to develop your team, and you're going to give them a day to do that, but they're going to go somewhere in an organisation, share really considered, education, get involved in an activity, have lunch, spend 5 hours with incredibly committed professionals and volunteers in a community. You can ask them to pay for that experience. And there's companies that won't pay for that. And at a very practical business level, there's a range of experiences for people that are genuine. Actually, we're not ticking a box, we really want to do something. We also do scratch and sniff in the garden, which is a shorter experience, but it's just as real as come in, have a think about why connecting through green is just important. And we can make our staff and our volunteers available because it takes time to create this for you. And it's done with really good intention because we'd love you to be part of our community. But it does come at a cost. You're always welcome in our community and people come in all sorts of ways. But we value ourselves. In my old corporate world, in advertising, they said, never be afraid of being a premium product. Never be afraid of being really proud of what you're doing. Like you were saying, John, if you're on mission, asking for something, that's okay because our time's really valuable. We've got a lot of people that we're got really great and wonderful and important stuff to be doing. So if we're going to give that time up to Westpac, then we absolutely feel perfectly okay with saying, well, this is what this costs.
And, you know, they'd think that a team building day, most corporates wouldn't think twice about spending a couple of $1,000 on throwing axes and an escape room and a nice meal at the end of the day. Whereas the value proposition you bring is much greater to that corporate. Yeah.
I can think of a lot of companies that have gone to Hawaii with their staff to build up their morale, and they've all got into a lot more trouble than bad publicity. I think it's a brilliant idea.
I assumed that was why, but I thought it was worth unpacking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's very hard to get. It's a challenge to get that balance right, and it's an art form, building partnerships at all level. But even if somebody's paying, inviting that team in as partners in the community, because we want meaningful, sustained relationships. We're not about, we'll take your check and see you later. That's not how we operate. And it's a wonderful way to have these ongoing relationships that have all these mad ideas that come out of that. I'm currently trying to work out how to bring a band of alpacas to the front of Wayside because there's a company that wants to do that with us. I'll get back to you on that one.
We've come to 8:30, and so I want to value people's time and people at home. It's been great conversation. Thank you for your philanthropy and your seeing bigger pictures and how to draw groups together, and we could learn how to do stuff with schools too and several other things, and your experience working in the church and even the governance around that. Kent was part of governing the Wayside before being where he is, and then your heart, John, and your stories, you've got a silver tongue, but I think you all do, actually. You're all very very charismatic, but it's because of kindness and real stories. That's why, because it's real. It's not performative. And thank you for the realness and the rawness of all that. I hope that's inspired us here. I have light bulbs go on left, right, and centre about stuff that's possible, and of course, it's only possible if we make it possible. How can we say love over hate, or know us and them? What are those things that we will say? So it's not actually ever up to a couple of professionals or even our whole church congregation or church council, but we do that so well that people all over Orange and the Central West are saying that, whatever it is, and they're pointing to us to learn about how to do that thing. So we were challenged today over lunch in the park, in Cook Park, to say, what's your public narrative? And we were unfleshing that. But let's dream together and figure it out and get that really tight. I think if we can really come up with some really great things we want to always point to, we always want to point to Jesus. Where's that being shown in our community? How are we going to communicate that? How are we that in Orange? And John and Kent talked about constantly going back to that. And, we've gone a bit far away. No, let's go back to that. Let's come up with the that. Because we're a pretty amazing room of people ourselves, actually, just quietly, getting to know a lot of you. Let's find out that and take everyone on the journey. So just a really huge thank you to the Wayside. We still have some time with them tomorrow. And hopefully this is... We're having a year of firsts but not last, because we're just starting journeying with people. I said first the other day to Anne and she just laughed at me. She said, I hope they're not first. Like, there's seconds and thirds and there's lots of them. And so this is hopefully not a first time that the Wayside's here and helping us dream. And hopefully Kate can help us figure out what to do with Kinross and how can we get them involved, how can we make the dreaming bigger and more kind, and there'll be all the ways we can't see as well. So that's what we're on about. That's what this is all about. That's what we're going to keep trying to do, figuring out that we can all point to in simple terms, and we can have the rest of Orange saying it too. Let's pray. God of relationship and kindness and spirit and great stories and wisdom and hearts, you're within us all. We're all a part of that story. In a great modern uniting term phrase, all of this is us. Help us discern what it is you are doing here in this place. Help us have the courage to live that and to proclaim that, and to, with deep kindness, share that. But better still, live that. Let us be that. Thank you for your Spirit. In the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.